Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby Price, and today we're here to go through our mid-season driver grades for the 2024 F1 season. Joining me today, we have Louis Edwards.
Hello.
Monkey See co-host Tom Horrox.
Hello.
And F1 writer Jawad Yaqub.
Hi, guys.
Before we get into the episode, we must thank our sponsor for this episode, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads whilst the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit of up to $250. Bet Online. The game starts here. And also be sure to follow us on our social channels at Grid Talk UK to stay up to date with the show. So, who has been getting their revision in and who has been sent to the team principal's office? Who knows their track limits and who limits their track time? It's time to reveal our mid-season driver grades for the first half of the 2024 season, starting with the worst, with the failures, with the Fs. Logan Sargeant. Louis, we've given him an F. You've given him an F. His best finish was P11 in Silverstone, and he's only really finished ahead of his teammate when his teammate has retired. How's Logan Sargeant's season gone so far?
Well, it's. I think the fact that Williams haven't hired him for next year, we already know that. I think is a perfect way to sum up his season. You know, he's not going to be in Formula One next year, and that is, I think, all we need to really remember. It has been, I think, just another year of just not being up to par, and I think that's unfortunately what we've seen now with quite a lot of these sort of young drivers who come into Williams. Unfortunately, they are just not up to par. We had it first with Latifi. We've now had it with Logan Sargeant. You know, it may be bad for the brand. I know that Liberty are probably going to be like annoyed that they no longer have an American poster boy for the 3 US Grand Prix that we have on the calendar. But that's just the way things are in Formula One. If you're not quick enough, you're going to get the boot. He's got an F because he's been terrible. He's got the boot because he's been terrible. The only thing he's done very well and done consistently is outqualify Sergio Perez.
I mean, that is certainly something to shout about, you know, beating a driver in what is reportedly the best car on the grid. But yeah, absolutely, as you say, I think the proof is in the pudding. If he was going to have performed, if he was going to be in the car next season, he needs to have performed. And, you know, one P11, which came, you know, towards the end of the season, the first half of the season, it's just not been good enough from Logan Sargeant. But moving up the grades then, just about to the E's. And we're going to start off with Sauber's Zhou Guanyu. Again, best finish was P11 in Bahrain. But, you know, the season open has kind of been Zhou's highest point and also Sauber's highest point, despite their pit stops. But, you know, what's gone on with Zhou's first half of the season?
Well, I think with Zhou, it's unfortunately for him, it's kind of like the Zhou experiment has failed. I think that he's had 3 years now in Formula One, and he had a good old spell in F2 as well before he got any good in F2, started winning races. He's very much here because of who he is, not what he could do, which is, you know, he was the final paid driver to really come into Formula One, and I was borderline offended by his employment into Formula One. I have to say, I was turned around on him. He seems like a very nice guy. He certainly turned out to be a decent peddler, but with the franchise model that Formula One has moved towards and the less reliance on bringing in finance from outside and actually having a sustainable sport has meant that his opportunities have become less and less, and nobody else really wants him. The only people that really would take him would be someone who just needed to bulk up their finances to get up to the budget cap, but no one really seems to be there. Not even Haas were interested. I was convinced that Haas would have been trying to sign him. It looks pretty set he's not going to be at Sauber next year, which, to be honest, he'll probably be glad to be out of that seat given how bad it is. But he's been absolutely schooled by Bottas this year. He's only out-qualified him once. Races have been a little bit different, but that's mostly down to Sauber's operational failings rather than anything that he's actually done. I haven't seen a single good thing from him all year. And to be fair, like his entire Formula One career has been very much like that. He's not really had any standout moments. I recall one P5 in qualifying, which quickly turned into a 0 points finish. So it's been a very unspectacular career for him, really, which is he's done better than I expected him to be honest, and that I'm glad for him for that. But I was it's not been great, and it's just the end of his spell. I think it's kind of natural that he drops out of Formula One at this point. He gave it a crack, he wasn't up to it, and I think it's probably gonna be the last we see of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's gonna have left a mark on Formula One, be it positive or neutral at the very least. I don't think there's going to be too much of a, too many people thinking, how on earth did Zhou get a seat? Why is he still got a seat at this point, as opposed to other drivers? But yeah, it's certainly been as unremarkable as Sauber have been for the last few seasons whilst that we've been had him. But Jawad, moving on to the Ds then. So we've obviously made it past our Fs and Es. Ds, if you get a D in a GCSE, it's generally, I think, still considered a pass. Is it not? I don't remember. It's been that long since I was at school. What can I say? I think they've changed it to numbers now anyway. Maybe we need to start doing numbers. We'll get on that in the future. But we'll look at some letters. We'll go back to letters. Daniel Ricciardo, starting off the Ds, Jawad. I think you actually gave him an E. Do you think we've been a bit too generous to Daniel Ricciardo here? What do you think of his first half of the season?
Either that, or maybe I'm just a bit too harsh on him, as I have been in previous Grid Talk shows after the races. Yeah, look, you could arguably say that he's, done enough to kind of pass, given that he will be kept on in that RB for the remainder of the season, as we have supposedly had the news for that. But at the same time, for me, the whole purpose of him being put back into a Red Bull, or into the Red Bull family, or into the RB as well, was so that he could be a contender, or be put back into that Red Bull seated alongside Max Verstappen, which, if you look at the results that he's put together so far this year, it hasn't been enough. So I think, given that his whole purpose of returning to F1, or being given that opportunity to drive for the Red Bull sister team, was to get back to the senior team, and he hasn't accomplished that in the time frame that they kind of allowed for him to show his worth in, is a bit of a fail in my eyes. And you can see that he's had some flash in the pan results. Miami in qualifying was particularly good. But then, apart from points in the sprint, the rest of the weekend didn't go his way. Canada was another decent result. But you look at how his head-to-head stack up with his teammate Yuki Tsunoda, who, by the way, as we know, isn't even being looked at for Red Bull, which is quite a damning indictment of that whole system. But that's a story for another time. So he's 10 points behind Yuki, losing the head-to-heads with him on qualifying and the race. And at the start of the year, there was that drama around that he potentially had a cursed chassis. They changed that in Canada, and in China, and it didn't really reverse his form much. And we've only seen points on a handful of occasions. So yeah, overall, I think a bit of a fail for Ricciardo, which is really difficult because he's in this position where, going into the summer break, it was either he could lose his drive at F1 altogether, or end up being promoted to Red Bull, and it hasn't been either of those at this point in the season. Whether it happens later or not remains to be seen. And also for next year as well, what do they do? Because if Red Bull want to stay committed to Sergio Perez, or go for another option, then I don't really see room for him at RB, because you've got people like Liam Lawson on the sidelines, Isaac Hadjar as well now, looking in a commanding position in the F2 Championship. RB, AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, whatever you want to call them, they're supposed to be the feeder team for Red Bull. So we need those junior drivers in, not some 8-time Grand Prix winner who's past his expiry date. So yeah, I'm a bit more emphatic about it because, flying the Aussie flag and whatnot. But we've said for most of this year that, yeah, Ricciardo is done, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not been the season that Daniel Ricciardo needs to justify that Red Bull seat. And arguably, of the drivers that have been in contention, for me, he's one of the lesser justified ones to be in that seat. Obviously, Red Bull know the data that their own drivers can perform. And, well, they also know the amount of money that other drivers bring in. So, it is a balancing act, but Daniel Ricciardo hasn't exactly been given, too much of a justification to be in the Red Bull seat, and the V-Carb seat hasn't exactly been lighting the timing sheets up either. But Louis, we'll stick with the D grades and we'll move on to an Esteban Ocon. Obviously in that Alpine, which at the start of the season was, widely considered one of the worst cars on the grid. But, he's managed to get, 4 points positions, the most recent being Belgium. And, he's shown up for Alpine more recently, but it's been a season marred with, penalties and unnecessary collisions. But how have you rated Esteban Ocon for the first half of the 2024 season?
Yeah, it's tricky. I'll be honest, giving Ocon his grade was possibly one of the more tricky ones for me. Because you did have to first take in consideration, as you rightfully said, that Alpine at the start of the season was awful. It was so bad. You can't, it would have been like comparing what Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris were doing in the McLaren at the start of last season. It's, you can't, the car was just really bad. And, personally, I gave him a C. So I gave him above what everyone else did. So, personally, I don't think he's doing all that bad. Yes, there have certainly been some controversies. Monaco, for example, I think the less said about Monaco, it was definitely a big blotch on Ocon's season, just unnecessary driving and unnecessary contact with his teammate that ultimately really marred his performance. But then, we've seen some good signs from Ocon, and I think he should have got more points. I think people will forget the fact he was completely screwed out of a position. Is it in Japan, where they made him let Gasly through and then never gave the position back? So it was one of the races. I distinctly remember Japan definitely was one of them. But it's happened a few times where Ocon has been asked to move out the way for Pierre, and it's ultimately cost him the Constructors' Championship points. And that's a shame, because Ocon isn't, for me, he's an all-right driver. I wouldn't say he's one of the best. I would definitely not say he's one of the worst. But unfortunately, he's lost his seat at Alpine. He's found his seat at Haas next year. And it'll just be interesting to see where he goes forward for the rest of the season, knowing that he's going to be on his way out. He's not exactly in favour with the team. The team's going through so much change and everything. There's not, God only knows what's going to happen with Alpine by the end of it. And no doubt Flavio will have some more controversy, get booted out of the sport again. I don't know.
Well, Singapore is in the second half of this season, but just like Esteban Ocon, we're going to move on to Haas as well now. Tom, Kevin Magnussen, we've given him a D. You've given him a C. His best finish was in Austria, but it's been a controversial first half of the season for K-Mag. Why don't you tell me about it?
Yeah, I mean, he was without a doubt my least favourite driver at various points during this season. I've lost a lot of respect for him in the way he's gone about things, but I think a lot of that is down to desperation and him trying to show that he's a team player, and with his mate Gunther Steiner now gone from the team, he hasn't got that sort of, not, I wouldn't say guaranteed C, but Steiner was well known to be a big fan of Kevin Magnussen and wanted him in the team. So obviously now with Komatsu, he doesn't feel like K-Mag brings enough, and he has had a terrible start to the season. One mistake still for the rest of the season, and he's going to get a race ban, although I'm pretty convinced that Formula One will do everything in their power to make sure that doesn't happen. I think that was proved when Gasly T-boned his teammate off the track and didn't get any points in Australia last year. I think Formula One have set the die there to say they are not going to ban anyone for a race. So I think he'll find some way to make that not happen. But Haas as a team look generally a lot sharper this year, and his teammate has excelled. And I'm sure we'll get to that a bit later on, much further up the driver rankings, I'm sure. But in both in qualifying and in races, his teammate has completely outdone him. But I think there have been some shoots of revival in the last 6 races, and he's definitely seemed to be finding a bit more peace with his situation, and I think he's not trying as hard, and I think we will see a better Kevin Magnussen in the second half of the season. I've given him a C purely because of how well his teammate was, not because of how well he's been on track, but Haas have been better. I think if you look at last season, he's definitely similar level to who he was last year. I don't remember what we gave him last year, but I don't think he's got worse by any stretch. I just think Haas have got better. But the end is nigh, I believe, and another kind of unspectacular end to an unspectacular career. I think his if he'd have F1 after his first race, I think he would have been revered. But, he's never reached the highs of his first race, which is a very, very odd stat. Second place in Australia. But yeah, it's that. I think it's, again, another end to the story. Natural. He had a reprieve, but it's led to some nice moments for him and some good memories and some closure. But I think that's it really for Kevin Magnussen. I think he's made peace with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, I do think it's been more of a sedate drive for Kevin Magnussen, since he reached the point of being at the limit for penalty points. As to whether he gets any more in a time that's going to have an impact, we'll see, but I very much doubt it. But Jawad, Lance Stroll has got a D grade with the best finish of P6 in Australia, generally considered to be in the safest seat in Formula One. How have you rated Lance Stroll this first half of the season? And, should we have seen a better Lance Stroll in the first half of the season?
Well, I feel like I put all my harshness into the Ricciardo rating, that I've gone against the grain in terms of positivity with Stroll and giving him a C-. I think he's actually done not too bad, but then again, he's had, all the chances in the world and the protection from the team, given that he's driving for his father's team. So, if it was any other driver, he ought to be doing better things in that car, particularly when you think about where Aston Martin were last year as second quickest team at one point. Then it's unfortunate for Stroll, he didn't really make hay while the sun shined there and, score podiums like his teammate did. But then again, his teammate is Fernando Alonso. Yeah, like you said, Ruby, he had a best result this year of 6th in Australia, but you look at the head-to-heads between he and Alonso, it is actually a lot closer than, would think. 5-9 in both quality and the races. With Alonso, I guess it's a situation where he's reached the point where he's throwing the toys out the cot as he normally does when he's not happy at a team. So perhaps Stroll, just goes about, does his thing and can occasionally jag a few more points than his teammate can. He did have a controversial moment in Hungary where, while we're focusing on McLaren and the team orders going out the front, there was a similar situation happening at Aston as well. And apparently Lance was supposed to swap the positions back with Fernando at the end there, which Lance didn't do, albeit it was for P10, so for a single point. But, I guess, pride matters for Alonso, and, he did the right thing for his teammate, but his teammate didn't return the favour. So while we have seen some highs, relative highs for Stroll this season, he then does go and do what Lance Stroll does. And as the famous radio from Saudi will be ringing in people's ears, I'm in the wall. So, yeah, he's, I guess, not going to ever be rated above a C grade, I reckon, unless, as Tom in the chat said, future world champion maybe one day when everyone else is retired. But yeah, I think he's done averagely, but then again, the whole team are quite average this year by comparison to where they were last year.
So what you're saying is he's a Nick de Vries F2 world champion when everybody that's got a chance of being a champion has already graduated and left Formula One.
Pretty much, which, makes it sound worse for Nick, unfortunately.
Man. Yeah, so, Louis, we're gonna give a D grade now to a driver who's had 3 second-place finishes, is in arguably one of the better 2 cars on the grid, but has absolutely not really performed very well since Miami. Sergio Perez. Why are we being so harsh on Sergio Perez, and is it justified?
Well, I think justification I'd leave to Mr. Tom Horrox, but I personally, I think a D grade is, it's below, it's just below par, isn't it? It's, if we said C is a par, D is below par. When you are in, let's not miss our words, the Red Bull has been, from the first half of the season, has been the best car. If you take the entire first half of the season, yes, McLaren have had their resurgence, but that has come later in this half. If you go from race 1 to now, the Red Bull has been the best car. And Checo was doing his job at the beginning when McLaren, when Ferrari, when Mercedes were not doing as well. He got his second place in Bahrain. He then got another second place in Saudi. He got a second place in Japan. And he got a podium also in China, I should say. But the thing that has really been the thing that just brought Perez down this year has been his qualifying and his ridiculously poor efforts getting out of Q1. I mentioned earlier, the only thing Logan has done consistently this year is out-qualified Sergio Perez. That's a huge problem. We could joke about it, but it's also a huge problem. You know, he has scored a lot of points, but he's had to do that coming from so far at the back of the grid, mixing with the midfield, where you should never be doing that. He should be the rear gunner for Max in P2, in P3. You know, he's got to be the one that takes the fight to McLaren, makes McLaren's job more difficult than McLaren make their own job, and then help Max just breeze off into the distance with this championship. It's because of Sergio Perez, McLaren have a chance. It's because of Sergio Perez, Lando Norris has a chance. And that's why we've given him such a poor grade, because he needs to be doing better. And the fact that he has not only signed a new contract, been rumoured to get kicked out of that contract before he even started that contract, and is now back on to that contract and is apparently secure for next year, says all you need to say.
You have to admit it would have been incredibly ironic if Sergio Perez got dropped from the Red Bull seat like 2 days before a documentary came out called Sergio Perez Never Give Up, you know, on Disney Plus in Latin America. You know, if there is any truth to the rumours that Liberty Media asked Red Bull not to drop him because of the financial harm it could have on Liberty Media and Formula One, I think that's the thing that indicates it.
I personally think it's to do with Red Bull merch sales. I don't think there's a person in Mexico that doesn't own some sort of Red Bull merchandise. Like you look at the Mexican Grand Prix, you see the crowd, they're all wearing Red Bull stuff. It's all Checo Perez stuff. You know, Red Bull have got to pay for, you know, their diving contests, their plane racing and whatever they're doing next. Yeah, and the catering. So, you know, that money's got to come from somewhere. And I think it's coming from Oracle Red Bull Racing, Sergio Perez. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we're going to finish off our D grades, Jawad, with Valtteri Bottas in the Sauber. Obviously, you know, we've given him a higher grade than his teammate, which I think is justified. Obviously, Valtteri Bottas has, you know, generally finished higher than Zhou. Zhou has the higher finishing position, which is the thing that puts him ahead, as far as I'm aware, in the Drivers' Championship. But, you know, why have we given Bottas a higher grade than Guanyu Zhou ultimately?
It is difficult saying that about the driver who is sitting last in the championship technically at the moment, but as you said, when you look at those individual metrics, the head-to-heads with his teammate, I think Tom mentioned it earlier that in qualifying, there's the 13-1 difference between him and Zhou, and then in the races, it's 9-5. So, you know, overall, I guess it's that experience of Bottas. You know, it's hard to remember that this is a former Grand Prix winner, 10-time Grand Prix winner for Mercedes, and, you know, multiple pole sitter as well, given how terrible that car and that team has been this year. There's no mincing words around that. It's been shambolic. When you look at the news that we've heard about, you know, the manufacturer that's taking over the Sauber team, or have supposedly taken over, they needed 100% takeover now, but, you know, the Audi are coming in 2026 as a factory team, yet, you know, they've got dramas with their management. They've lost, you know, key personnel. They've hired Jonathan Wheatley from Red Bull, we heard this week, as their team principal. He's never been a team principal before, so going in there under Mattia Binotto, and still looking for a second driver because Carlos Sainz obviously didn't believe enough in them to commit to that team. But what does that mean for Bottas? Well, the team that potentially didn't want him for next year might end up having to go with him, unfortunately, or fortunately for Bottas. And I think he would still make a very good candidate. And while, you know, the results this year haven't really shown this, you know, skilled, experienced driver that I was talking about earlier, I feel like, you know, if a team is to get better and progress, you know, you want Bottas as the driver in there. It's just unfortunate that we haven't had those results to show for it. So I reckon he'll do enough to hopefully be kept on there. If not, I don't know if there's any other seats around. Why don't Mercedes take him back? That'd be nice, but I know that's not going to happen. So, yeah, on that basis, better than what Zhou's performed, unfortunately, this year. But, yeah, a former race winner, it's very galling to see him down that far and he could be doing better. But then again, the car's been shocking and the team can't even do a pit stop to save their lives, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. It hasn't been a great season so far from Sauber, completely pointless. Definitely not 5 stars, but if you enjoy this podcast, we'd love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're one of the 72% of people who aren't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. So moving on now to the C's, the average, the middle of the road, the expected of you, the GP2 engines, because let's obviously start off with Fernando Alonso, Tom. His best finish was P5 in Saudi Arabia, but Aston Martin just haven't been as good this season, and as we've seen the cars, the midfield almost sort of bunch up together and Aston Martin almost go backwards. We've seen a lot of outbursts from a very passionate Spanish driver. Is a C justified for Fernando Alonso? How has it been this first half of the season?
I think it's absolutely justified. I think that's it's been a tough season for him, and he's definitely been reverting to type this year. It seemed like he finally made the move that could get him to win races and everything, but in reality, last season was very much Ferrari, McLaren, and Mercedes underperforming, and then Aston Martin doing what they should be doing, and that's making a decent car. And they did that last season. It led to a glut of early podiums, and then Fernando Alonso being sold on the vision. And this season, it's kind of come crashing down to what we were expecting from that. When Fernando first signed for Aston Martin, we were expecting, so he's now confined to P9 and P10 championship. They are at least outperforming Alpine, so it's not been a disaster for Fernando Alonso. But the problem with Fernando at this stage in his career, he can't really race a bad car when there's nothing on the line. And he is outperforming Lance Stroll 9-5 in the races, but Stroll only beat Alonso twice in the whole of last season. Yet this year he's beaten him 5 times already, and Stroll has not had a good season. I've got them both for great C's, and I think that they are the closest teammate battle when it comes to qualifying pace. Just let that sink in there. The guy that absolutely destroyed Lance Stroll last year and said he's still, that was the best qualifying session I've ever had. This is a long distance from the Fernando Alonso that he has had us believe that he still is, and I think we're now finally seeing that decline of Fernando Alonso, and there's more mistakes coming in. The dissent is starting to come out, and he stopped talking about the team and the car to journalists, and I think he's definitely got a little bit of buyer's remorse. I remember a slight dig he made at Mercedes when he said, "Why would I sign for Mercedes? Aston Martin are quicker than them." Well, how much does he regret that comment now? And I just think it's his behaviour this season it's the reason why he's only 2-time world champion. Let's be honest. I mean, a few results here and there, and he could be a 5-time champion. Guess what? Lewis Hamilton could be a 10-time champion. There are a few things different, and there's lots of things you can change for history, but it is what you do that matters. And what he's done is self-sabotage for his entire career, and only 49 points this season. I don't think he could have done much better in the car that he's got, but he is making more mistakes, and he's not really gelling the team around him. I think that team need to move on from the Fernando Alonso situation. I think an entire clean sweep is the best thing for that team, but that's not going to happen. How good would it be for Lawrence Stroll to say, "Look, my boy's disposed of Fernando Alonso, one of the greatest Formula One drivers of all time. He must be incredible." So I think this suits Aston Martin's narrative. If they come up with a good car next season and Lance Stroll can be better than Fernando Alonso in it, a broken Fernando Alonso, then that's probably what they want overall. But it's not been great. I think a C grade is just about right for Fernando. I think we've seen the best of him now. He may get his day of days in a rainy Singapore or something where maybe Lance Stroll crashes into a barrier. No, let's not go down that route. But he may get the odd day, the odd podium here in the next year or two. But I can't see it. I think that's pretty much the end of it now for Fernando.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, Aston Martin probably want new owners, new drivers, and new everything. Was that part of their 5-year plan? I guess we'll see. But Jawad, let's have a look at the only other driver we actually rated with a C, and that was Pierre Gasly. And obviously we've talked about Esteban Ocon and how difficult it was to give Esteban Ocon a grade. Pierre Gasly, is he deserving of a higher grade than Esteban Ocon? And also, how's his sort of season been?
well, he didn't crash into his teammates, so that's one of the reasons he got a higher grade from me. You know, it's the cardinal rule of any motorsport: don't crash into your teammate. Yeah, it's difficult to, like, looking back on it now, like, you know, all the head-to-heads and, you know, stuff are in Ocon's favour, yet they rated Gasly higher. I guess, you know, when you look at the team's commitment to him, they gave him a new long-term deal as well, starting from next year. It looks like he's making the most of a subpar car from a subpar manufacturer team. Let's not forget that Alpine are a works team, and I could sit here for hours rambling on about the failings of that organisation. Yeah, they are a manufacturer team for now, so, you know, Flavio gets in, does his little shifty business. But as far as Gasly's concerned, look, I think, you know, he's got a higher ceiling that he can reach within that team, hopefully. Pair of P9s has been his best result so far this season. And, you know, in Monaco as well, despite the fact he did get rammed by his teammate, he still came home and scored a point on the day. So I think that's something that, you know, they'd look at favourably as well. But, you know, He's been no better. He's been no worse. C is right on average. So I feel like, you know, he's average for me. So yeah, I can't really say much more than that.
The best Alpine could hope for in 2024 was average, and I think that is arguably very true of Alpine. Right, we've covered our C grade drivers. Let's look at some Bs. Tom Horrocks. Let's start off with Alex Albon. Best finish P9 in Monaco and Silverstone, beating his teammate at every race that he has finished. Justified? Deserved? Is he a B driver?
Well, I gave him a B, so that's. I mean, you should make. You know, you take a lot of credence in what I say as being right. It's a different matter, but yeah, I had him as a B driver. I think that's about right. I think he was borderline A last year, and I don't think he's been as good as last year. He's destroyed his teammate, as we know. But it's so difficult. We had a similar thing with George Russell when he was up against Nicholas Latifi. We just didn't know. We just didn't know how good he was. And I think we've still got that a little bit with Alex Albon. He's only 4 points P18, still behind Ollie Behrman, who's only done one race. But one good day from Albon, and he could be up to P13, P14. Now, I know that's still nothing to write home about, but he could be ahead of that pack. He's certainly got the talent to be ahead of that pack. But I just don't think there's been enough of a push on from last year for him. He's definitely still highly thought of, but I think there's a reason why you didn't have people like Mercedes sniffing after Alex Albon and Red Bull, one of the biggest offenders of him. They stuck with him through thick and thin, and realistically, by the numbers, the worst teammate to Max Verstappen, he is still on the numbers. The worst teammate, Perez, is this season is just about beating him, to be honest. But up until recently, yes, definitely has been the furthest away from Max Verstappen of any teammate, and they gave him a season and a half, so they didn't see enough faith to put him back in that car. I just think that with Williams ramping up their involvement, their investment in the team, he's still making silly mistakes. The car this year is a lot more neutral than it was last year, so those big paydays are not going to be there. He has to be there every week now, whereas he just has to be there on their day of days last year. Like, obviously he missed out in 22 in Monza when they could have had a big score, and then that all of a sudden we get 6 months of Nick de Vries thanks to that. Thanks Alex's appendix, that was good. But I just, like I say, I think that's fine. For me he's a low B, not quite as good as last year, but I can't wait to see him alongside Carlos Sainz, because we will get a proper measure of him there, and he's going to have to step up next year if he's not careful. I know Sainz has only got a 2-year contract. I believe Alex has got a 3-year contract. I could be wrong on that, but Sainz has signed a 2-year deal. So, but Sainz could become that team leader if Williams make that jump forward for 2026 that they're hoping to. Then Alex Albon could find himself once again in a number 2 driver situation, and he is going to have to push on and prove that he is this guy that everyone has been thinking he was the last couple of years. But yeah, be just about right for me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, he might even be thinking, are there any other organs that I can take out to lose some weight and get a good end to this 2024 season? If you've got any suggestions or any contacts, let us know on social and we'll get in touch to, you know, propose some weight loss for Alex Albon and that Williams team. But let's have a look, Louis, at the first of the 2 Ferrari drivers, Carlos Sainz. We've given him a B, you've given him a B. His best finish being that P1 in Australia, but it has been a very close fight in the Ferrari camp so far this season.
I mean, Sainz, I think his soul has possibly just been absolutely torn to bits this season. He had a very good season last year. I think a lot of people don't give him the credit he deserves for how much of a fight he's taken to Leclerc. I think people expected Leclerc just to absolutely run rings around him, but Sainz has held his own. He's done very well, and he then started that again. This year, he got a podium in Bahrain. He had to withdraw from Saudi. That gave Behrman his opportunity because of his appendix. Comes back after his appendix, wins the race, then gets another podium. He's had a couple more podiums since that, and I don't see really what more Sainz can do. I mean, he's driving in a Ferrari which has been massively inconsistent, and I think that's possibly clouded our judgment slightly on a B. I think he's definitely teetering between an A and a B for me. I think he's done pretty well, but that Ferrari has let him down more than once. And I will say, actually, one thing that definitely has let him down was his performance in Canada. Silly little crash that he had with Albon. That was a bit stupid from him. But overall, yeah, he's definitely been better than average. He's definitely been pretty solid, and I'm glad that he has found a seat for next year. It's not like the team I'd wished he was. I would have really hoped he would have maybe gone back, to Red Bull, but I think politics around that prevented that, and unfortunately Mercedes are too dead set. We all know who Mercedes want. I don't think they want Carlos Sainz, but I think Carlos will do then a good job in Williams, and I think he'll do a good job for the rest of the season. I think he is a really solid B driver, B the A driver, and I think he'll continue doing what he's did for this last few years that he's been at Ferrari.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, he's been in an inconsistent Ferrari, but every time he's finished a race, he's finished in the points, which is what you need. And it's kind of, the driver that you expect Carlos Sainz to be. Jawad, we'll move on to his teammate now, Charles Leclerc. And, as I just said, I think Carlos Sainz has been the more consistent of the two, despite the actual car's lack of consistency. And Charles Leclerc has, definitely made some strategy blunders, some wrong calls, but his best finish was a P1 in Monaco, his home race, both Ferraris having both one race each. Is he a B driver?
Yeah, for me, he has been, for those reasons you just said, the strategy blunders on his side as well. And there's been times this season where I guess you kind of ask yourself, did Ferrari let go the wrong driver? We heap a lot of praise onto Carlos Sainz for his sort of, methodicalness when it comes to stitching together a race and all that sort of stuff that they've, been compared, when you compare both of them together in their 3-year stint. Has it been 3 years? Yeah, 3 years that they've been together. That, Sainz is slightly the better race car driver in terms of the races, I should say. But yeah, it's no secret that the car and the operational shortcomings of Ferrari are still fundamental issues, and Canada was an absolute nightmare for the team, but also for Leclerc, who then got put on the wrong tyres at the wrong time, and then there was power unit problems, and yeah, eventually they just said, we'll call it a day, But then I'm so happy, as many of us will be really happy to see him get that monkey off his back, which was the Monaco Grand Prix win, his home Grand Prix. So, if you want to believe that Ferrari came into this season with a car that was designed around winning races like Monaco or Singapore, yeah, sure. But if they win Singapore and any of the other street races that are left in the season, good on them. But they're still not quite that championship, caliber team that we all keep expecting them to be. And Leclerc as that kind of spearhead as well just hasn't quite shown it yet. And for us to say, Sainz has, overall been a bit more consistent, considering Ferrari put all their eggs into the Leclerc basket when it comes to the championship, says that, Charles really needs to step it up. And, obviously next year is going to be a big test for him, bringing in 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, who, now that he's got his mojo back as well after, winning a couple of races this year, I think, we're going to see a fierce fight there. So that'll be a big test for Leclerc. And I don't think he's, passed with flying colours with Sainz as his teammate. And, so far what we've seen this year hasn't really convinced me that, he's emphatically shut away Sainz. So he's really going to have to step it up, I think, in the next half of the season just to get himself back into that sort of A grading. Because, I don't really see him above a B at the moment.
Yeah, the signs have been there, but it certainly has been a lackluster. No, I couldn't make that pun where I'll abandon it halfway through. A bit like a Ferrari strategy. There we go, I brought it full circle. Tom, let's look at George Russell before I go even more insane. We've given him a B, which means that, we've not got to his teammate yet. But best finish P1 in Austria. Could this have been a different discussion had there not been that disqualification in Belgium, do you reckon?
Yeah, not just the disqualification in Belgium, and also the P3 in, a probable P3 in Silverstone, which through no fault of his own was taken away from him. Even with that, he's P8 in the standings. He's won a race. He's just behind Perez in the best car, but we all know that Sergio Perez is not a yardstick to base your performance on. The Austria win was somewhat inherited, and he did have a missed opportunity in Canada. So it's been a bit hit and miss for him. I think had he been a bit more clinical this year, he could well be P3 in the championship, knocking on the door of Norris. And considering how bad that car was at the start of the season, that shows that he is knocking on the door of performing as an A-level driver. He's definitely got the consistency. He's much more consistent than his teammate, certainly over the course of the season, and he's proved that he can lead that team. But I think the big but with George at the moment and why he's still a B-level driver is that he's proven for years that he's great at driving a bad car. But when it's a good car, he doesn't seem to be on the same level as other drivers, going for those wins. If Merck can remain being competitive in the second half of the season, it's crucial for his career that he can get on top of Lewis Hamilton and beat him in the championship, because if that Mercedes remains as competitive as it looks at the moment, still not the best car, probably not even the second best car, to be honest. But if it's in a ballpark where on occasion it can win races and it's up there with the Red Bull and the McLaren fighting for positions, then he needs to win a hatful of races and needs to prove that he can lead that team. Because let's be honest, at some point in the next season, maybe 2 seasons, maybe even this year, well, not in the same car, but they're going to have Antonelli in that car. Touted as a generational talent. Going up against George Russell, obviously we know how well he's done against Lewis Hamilton, but again, different scenario, different situation, different stages of their career. And the constant rumours about Max Verstappen, they're not sour. They can't sign 3 drivers. What's going to happen if Max Verstappen does get fed up of Red Bull? They're going to want him in that car. And if they've got Antonelli in there, he's the investment in their future. If George hasn't proved in the second half of this season that he can go toe-to-toe with the best in good machinery, I can see him being the sacrificial lamb and probably end up in an Audi car waiting for a race-winning car for the next 10 years. So it's been a good season for Russell, but he does need to knock out those little mistakes. I know he's had a podium and a win taken away from him, but he probably should have had 3 wins on the board this year. So it's crossroads for George's career. He needs to kick on second half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And from one driver who's very good on a Saturday to another driver who's also been very good on a Saturday, Nico Hulkenberg, Louis. We've given him a B. Best finishes of P6 in Austria and Silverstone. He is constantly outperforming his teammate and has often had the favoured strategy of the Haas strategies. Is it working for him, this combination? And, he's obviously he has been chosen to be the driver going to Audi, not Aldi, has he maybe made a mistake? Is this season working for him?
I would certainly say so. I mean, Tom mentioned earlier when he was talking about Kevin Magnussen that, he's been completely outshined by his teammate. This is a sentiment that I completely agree with. Nico Hulkenberg has not only been a very solid, reliable driver this year, he has been the one dragging that Haas team along with him. And the reason why we're seeing such great improvement in the sort of general ability of Haas to score points. He has been an amazing driver since he came back to Haas, and that has just continued on this year. So I don't think, he's having to really prove all that much to get that grade. He's done an absolutely solid job in my opinion, and I think he is definitely a good signing for Audi. I don't know where they're going to be next year, considering how bad the car has been this year. So it could be another sort of work from the ground up and kind of just drag that team into some sort of malleable state for 2026. But I think Nico Hulkenberg is a great driver. I think he's a vastly underrated driver. Of course, that sort of lingering issue of never been on a podium will always remain above his head until he gets there. But, I think that's been kind of pushed down at the moment because we know that Haas is not a podium-capable car, so I don't think he has to worry about that. But he has done a great job. He's not been an absolute idiot on the track like his teammate has been at times, and I think that certainly puts him in a better light.
Yeah, absolutely. He's showing what he's got and showing as to why, arguably, it might have been the wrong decision earlier for him to not be on the grid in those previous seasons, even though he showed up regardless because, he was that super sub. But we'll move on to the last of our B-grade drivers then. Yuki Tsunoda in the V-Carb. Best finishes of P7 in Australia and Miami. As I think I previously mentioned, it's 7 each in the teammate head-to-head for Grand Prix results. But, he's often not being the driver in contention for that second Red Bull seat, despite being in the Red Bull family. Has Formula One made a mistake by not, considering him? Has he been performing really well this first half of the season?
Well, a little bit of a throwback to last year. I was a huge supporter of Yuki Tsunoda, and he was in my top 10 performers for the entire season. And I think this year he's not done as well. I personally gave him a C, which, given that I've been a big supporter of him, it surprised me actually when I look back at it. But you look at the races this year, he started quite well. I mean, I take Bahrain, the kind of craziness with Ricciardo on the cool down lap out. He looked like he was starting really well, and Ricciardo was way down the pecking order and just not seemed to be performing. But the last 6 races for me have really let him down, and he looked like he was giving Red Bull such a headache of well, look, we obviously don't want Yuki in the car, but what are we going to do? We've got this underperforming guy with, we're starting to come under pressure in the Constructors' Championship. Had Yuki pushed on and performed to the same level he did in the first part of this season, I don't think they've got any choice. They've got to put him in that car. The pressure would be so huge. But instead, when Red Bull have come out with the call to action to say, you guys step up, show us what you can do, and you'll end up in a Red Bull seat, what does he do? He bins it in qualifying. And the last 6 races, Ricciardo has very much had the measure of him. You say the head-to-heads in the races, and qualifying now is close right up. It's really close between them. And I would argue that in the last 6 races, Ricciardo has been a better performer than Yuki Tsunoda. So that's why, for me, he drops into that C category, because that Red Bull seat is there for the taking, but he just keeps fumbling it at the wrong times, whether it's the pressure of trying to go for it or whether he's just trying too hard, I don't know. But he's a talent. He's quick. He's really, really good. He's got some rough edges that need smoothing out. Maybe the Red Bull is not the place to smooth out those rough edges, but this is 4th season in Formula One now. He needs to smooth off those rough edges, and I don't think he's been supported and nurtured as he should be. I think they've very much said, well, we've lost Gasly, so he's our yardstick now. I think they've kind of just put him on the shelf as, right, that's your barometer, that's what you got to aim at. And whoever comes in is like, right, beat Tsunoda, you'll be in the main team. But never any conversation about Tsunoda being up there. And I just feel like he needs to leave that organisation to further his career. But I think he will just drop out of Formula One unless Red Bull either supports him more or he moves on to pastures new. So that's why, for me, he didn't quite hit the B grade level again. I think he's definitely got the potential to be in there, and he could win races in the right car, but he's just not quite. He's just one step away at the moment. I'm sure I'm going to be positive about someone in this podcast at some point.
Maybe, this has been a trend now for 4 years, but yeah, what can we say? Let's get to our A tier categories then. We're going to start off, Jawad, with Lando Norris. Finally, dropped the nickname Lando No Wins with his best finish of that P1 in Miami. Could have had 2 wins this season. Actually, probably could have had significantly more if it weren't for some mistakes, but could have had 2 wins if it weren't for a McLaren strategy call. But is he deserving of an A grade? Has Lando Norris put in the performance this first half of the season?
Yeah, I think he has, and but I gave him an A minus because I feel like there is still some edges that need to be cleaned up. And, for all the talk of him being in championship contention with Max Verstappen. I mean, it is a 78-point gap. There's 10 races left. 3 of them are sprint weekends, and 200-odd points are on offer. So mathematically, it's possible. It would require him to go on and win multiple races in the remaining 10. And given the opportunities that have kind of been squandered in this first half of the season, I'm guessing you referenced Silverstone with the lost opportunity there, but there is also Barcelona, Canada, Imola, arguably as well, Austria too. So I might sound a bit pessimistic looking at all the missed opportunities, but, for me, the biggest thing that Lando needs to work on, and I feel like it's the last thing left for him to make that next step, is to, get that calm temperament in there and just not be seen as easily flustered. It's so easy that on the radio you hear him kind of losing his cool at his engineer. We can go on about Hungary as well, what happened in the dying stages of that race, and how, we didn't really hear from him until the end, so what was going through his head, despite the team saying, look, you got to think about the team, all the Sunday morning briefings we have. And I think back to Melbourne, for example, where Oscar was told to move aside at his home race, and potentially in the shout of the podium was a P3 they were fighting for that day, and the team prioritised Lando that day. So I think after the race in Hungary, they would have had to remind Lando that, yeah, we got your teammate to move aside for you at his home race for P3. So, I think he's got to be unified with the team, because let's be honest, he's, worked with this team since he came into F1 back in 2019, and work with them to get back to where they are today, which is in a position where they can win races, fight for the championship. But, it's just at times this season we've seen him struggle being at these lofty heights, and we know that he's not been in this position before. The team haven't been in this position before. And speaking of the personnel that are currently with the team, of course, McLaren have won multiple championships in the past. So it's about ironing out those rough edges. I think he's still been one of the standout drivers this season. He needs to address his starts as well. He's had 2 pole positions this year, and both of them he's lost pretty early on in the races. And Hungary, the argument there as well is, he, lost the lead on the start, and his teammate got the better of him there. So, that's go to figure. So, yeah, while he's still one of the standout drivers this season, I think there is still more he can do to really justify being talked about as a championship contender. But I feel like his efforts for McLaren, where they are in the Constructors' Championship and potentially go on and win this year, commendable of an A. So can't say any more, can't say any less. Good on you, Lando.
And jumping across the garage, Louis, to his teammate Oscar Piastri, also an A grade. I think it speaks wonders that both McLaren drivers are being given an A grade, at their mid-season driver ratings, considering where McLaren have been at this kind of point for the previous few seasons. Absolutely a good start to the season for 2024 from McLaren and Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, I think my judgment of Oscar and his performances I've rated him when Oscar's been in control of his destiny, if you gotta get what I mean. He did a mighty job in Silverstone. You cannot take anything away from what he did at Silverstone. It's the fact that he got absolutely screwed on the strategy. Whoever's wise choice was for him to stay out boggles the brain. But then he managed to fight back, and he came so close. He has been remarkable. He's been an excellent second driver to Lando this year. He has put in the performances we know he's been able to do for the last 2 years. He is a seriously talented driver. He is, if luck goes his way, he's a future world champion just on his own talent alone. But the McLaren are up to the task of actually winning a world championship. And unfortunately for Oscar, that's kind of been his Achilles' heel. Has been some strange strategy calls, often strategy calls that favour Lando rather than himself. he's certainly been at the mercy of that a few times, and that's definitely cost him points, it's cost him positions, it's cost him podiums, as Jawad said, in Australia, and that's kind of a shame. But we all know he's more than capable of keeping doing. His performance in Hungary was exceptional. He was solid. He led the race. He held pace very well. Unfortunately, that race was kind of just tarnished with all the mess that happened internally, and it kind of took away from it a bit, which was a shame because he really did deserve that. And it's, all of his efforts over the last 2 years coming into Formula One, the circumstances he came into Formula One, he's shown that he is an incredible driver, and he's done the exact same again at the start of this year, and he's more than worthy of that A grade.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's, as you say, it's just been a drive completely, opposite to the team that he was reportedly signing for 2 years ago, last week at the time of recording, I want to say. But no, absolutely, an A grade for Oscar Piastri at this midpoint of the season is fully deserved. And moving on to another A grade driver that we've given out, Lewis Hamilton, Tom, best finish P1 in Silverstone and Belgium, breaking that 945-day streak without a race win to claim his first since 2021, his first in the ground effect era. But, it's not been the most consistent of seasons from Lewis. Is it an A mid-season? I know that you've given him a B.
I have given him a B, and I must admit, I'm a little bit surprised that he's ended up in this A category. But we can start with the positives. I mean, he's finished in the top 4 and scored 105 points in the last 6 races, which is championship winning form. He's got 2 wins. He's ahead of his teammate, who we all said is a very performing at a very high level as well. So that's all great. But if you look at the first 8 races, and we are doing a season review, not a form review, the previous 8 races, he scored 35 points. He was losing 7-1 to Russell in qualifying, 6-2 in the race. He is not an A performing driver this season, especially when we saw how without Russell being disqualified from Belgium and DNFing in Great Britain, he's behind him in the championship. Both of those things were completely out of George Russell's hands. Now, I know George Russell probably had a slight performance advantage in Belgium, but even if you say P2, George is still nipping up with Hamilton there. So for me, the fact that Russell and Hamilton are in separate categories just is baffling. I don't understand that. So sorry, Grid Talkers, I don't understand your. I know it's done on an average, but I don't understand the average there, because for me, Russell and Hamilton are absolutely in the same ballpark. There's an argument for them both in the A ratings, but I don't think that doesn't stand up for me. I've given nobody an A+. I think generally the standard of driving this year has dropped a tiny bit, but that being said, I do think I'll just do a tiny bit more negative before I move on to the positive. The first 8 races of his career, of this season, I think are the worst 8 races patch in his career. I don't think he's performed that badly in an 8-race spell at any point in his career. And that's a third of the season, so how can he be in an A grade for me? But we do hold him to very high standards because of who he is and what he's done in the past. He has seemed to have turned a corner. He can get closer to 100% out of a difficult car that's on a knife edge than pretty much anyone else on the grid. I think he's in a very similar situation to what we see with Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Stroll. When the car is not so great, him and his teammate, there's nothing between them, and if anything, he can fall behind him. But when the car is at its best, as I said when I was talking about George Russell, he seems to go on to a different level. That win in Silverstone seems to have just lit a fire under his posterior and got him going again. And it's great to see the old Lewis back again. And if he pushes on in the second half of the season, then maybe we can get him up in that A category by the end of the season. But he would have to have a stunning end of the season for me to get into that A category. But, this is a democracy where we've given him an A. And I even though I disagree, I can absolutely see why, the last few races he has been his old self, which is great. Right now, he is performing at an A. But for the first half of the season, I disagree with that.
Yeah, for the first half of this, almost the first quarter of the season, you might, phrase it as, you could have been forgiven for thinking that Lewis was basically phoning it in, whilst he was waiting for that Ferrari seat for the season afterwards. But, since Mercedes brought in those upgrades, it seems to have worked for him. And as you've also mentioned, Tom, that Silverstone win has lit a fire under the posterior of Lewis Hamilton. So, This only leaves one driver remaining, and whilst there is still an A+ grade, we're not going to it. We're staying with the A. Max Verstappen has performed at an A grade. His best finish is obviously his 7 P1s, and he's been his teammate at every race that he has finished, and it's usually by some margin. But it's not been a perfect season for Max Verstappen, has it, Jawad?
And no, and I think that's what's keeping him from getting that A+ rating that he would have had this time last year, certainly, and also at the end of last year when you look at that epic 2023 season he had. We sort of had shades of that in the first 5 races this year where he won the 4 of them. He obviously had that retirement in Melbourne out of his hands for the car failure. But, if you go back to, like you said, that first quarter of the season, it was very much looking like we could have a repeat of 2023 on our hands. But then he won 3 more races after that. And that, I think, for me, was more impressive than those dominant, car, man, machine, all in harmony sort of wins that we had earlier on, because he didn't quite have the fastest car under his belt when you had Lando Norris nipping at his heels, or, having some kind of strategy blunder. I'm talking about Imola, Barcelona, Canada. It was all races where we saw the prowess and the skill of Max Verstappen working with his team on the pit wall to make sure they execute a better race than McLaren and Norris. So, that was impressive on my part. And, certainly, he's leading the championship still by 78 points. So it's still a big buffer based on all those results. Where I guess he's losing grade or, losing extra marks to keep him from that plus is that after all this time, we haven't seen cracks, and there are cracks beginning to show in the Max Verstappen. We look at Austria towards the end of the race there. They're coming together with Norris and Norris over the radio, and you could look at the replays and everything as well about Max kind of moving under braking, which is something that, he was a serial offender when you look back at his early seasons. And, the most you'll ever hear out of Kimi Räikkönen was complaining about him doing that at Spa all those years ago. And obviously the FIA created the rule around moving under braking and kind of tightened it there. But yeah, we saw a bit of the desperate driving from Max there. Then in Hungary, not only the irate radio messages that we had, I wish I had Jeep's thick skin, because, he puts up with a lot of GP Lambiase, Max's engineer. I wish, I had his thick skin, because he puts up with a lot on the radio from Max. But then, the collision with Hamilton as well was just lazy and, come on, what was that all about? So we're starting to see some cracks showing through. I also wonder, given that, Max is normally immune to sort of external political dramas, whether the stuff going on with Red Bull that has been going on throughout the season has had any kind of effect on him. Of course, his dad seems to make more headlines in this department, talking about, whether he'll stay or Max will stay at the team or not stay, depending on if Helmut Marko is there or Adrian Newey, etc., etc. So, it's a real tricky one. And, when we hear potential rumours about him going over to Mercedes or Toto Wolff doing his best to lure him over, you just wonder whether, those moments of frustration that we're seeing from Max on track, could be the catalyst to that eventually. But at the end of the day, he's still been, arguably the best this season. He's on top of the championship, got a healthy margin as well. I feel like he will still seal out his 4th consecutive championship at the end of the day. But, what we have learned, I guess, with the driving standards seeing this season and everyone else kind of catching up, is that they are beatable. And I guess with all the headlines going off the track around Red Bull and also around Max's teammate as well, Max has kind of just cruised and done his thing, won races, gotten pole positions, and has himself a healthy lead. So it's going to be interesting to see how the second half goes, or the remaining 10 races, and whether he can kind of rediscover that calmness. If not, then, I think he could sabotage himself, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we wrap up, we're just going to do a brief driver of the mid-season. Who's who's impressed the most in this first half of 2024? And we'll start with you, Louis. Who's been your driver of the mid-season?
I mean, looking back at my grades, it would be really easy if I just gave someone an A+, but I didn't give anyone an A+. I gave several drivers an A. So I gave Lando Norris an A. I gave Lewis Hamilton an A. Sorry, Tom. I gave Max Verstappen an A. I gave Oscar Piastri an A. So I guess it would have to be between one of those four. And honestly, the only person I could think I can realistically justify, given all the parameters given from race 1 until now, would have to be a championship leader. You know, there's a reason why he's at the top of the championship. He has been performing the best. He's been incredibly consistent at the start of the season. As the teams have caught up, Red Bull have looked a little bit more vulnerable, but he's still managed to hang in there. Even when Red Bull have been seriously off the pace, Max is always there. He's always a threat. You can never count him out of a Grand Prix weekend for a win. So for me, it would have to be Max Verstappen. He's kind of the boring choice, but I think given all the parameters, given the fact that we're not going off form, we're going off full half season, it would have to be Max.
Yeah, and a very valid justification of that as well. Tom, who's been your driver of the mid-season?
Well, I was going to say Max Verstappen as well, but Joe and Louis have both eloquently spoken about just how good that guy is. So I'm going to give a bit of love to Oscar Piastri. And I think given the first half of the season, from what he's come from and the level of his expectation, he's still learning. He's learned an awful lot about time management. He is getting better to a driver that is, let's be honest, very highly thought of. And Lando Norris has not had a perfect season. I'd love to say Lando for the first half of the season, but if he'd have won a couple more races, I probably would have done. But Piastri is the one that's been a constant thorn in his side, really. And that is just not expected of somebody who has just come into Formula One in their second season to be going toe-to-toe with Lando Norris in what is now pushing to be one of the best cars, if not the best car on the grid. So for me, certainly because of how far he's come and how far he still has to go, it's Oscar Piastri for me. Sorry, Jawad, if you're going to pick him.
I mean, a very valid justification as well of Oscar Piastri. Jawad, how about you then? Let's round it out.
Yeah, I was going to give some love to Oscar there because I feel like I haven't really spoken much about him this year. But yeah, it's hard to go past Max on all the metrics, as Louis said. And, you know, you can cut and paste my speech about him earlier into this segment too. But yeah, he's clearly held on. Even those races where Red Bull haven't had the fastest car, they've just shown how, you know, he and Max, the team and Max, are still able to work together on strategy and pulling together a good race. And, you know, I hope Ferrari and McLaren can take some pointers from them with how they execute their races in the future. So, yeah, Max on that. But then, you know, I'll give extra points to Oscar as well, the Aussie Iceman, as we should start calling him, given his cool and calm temperament.
The new Iceman, Oscar Piastri. Yeah, absolutely. Right, cool. Before we wrap up then, let's, just give a chance for some plugging and some promo. So, Tom, let's start off with you. Anything you want to plug? Where can people find Monkey Seat?
Yeah, go and listen to the Monkey Seat. Grid Talk Home, simple as that.
Wrapping it up very quickly here. Louis, anything you want to plug at this opportunity?
Not personally, but make sure to follow Grid Talk on all channels at Grid Talk UK. That's on Threads, YouTube, Instagram, everywhere that you consume social media. It is at Grid Talk UK.
Yeah, go and follow us, please. And Jawad, anything you want to plug at this time?
Yeah, if you want to check out more of my work, I write for a website called theraw.com.au, so do all the F1 race live blogs for them and some articles every now and again. So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing these days.
Yeah, and if you want to find more from me, you can find me on the Meta-owned socials at Rube001. But Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most episodes are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for a back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon so we can help support the show, and also make sure you subscribe so you're first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more of F1 content as the F1 season does return underway. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye.